Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's lecture. I'm very happy to be able to welcome Chip Lord. He's come from San Francisco. He's just missed the hurricane, and I'm very glad that he's here with us as a part of the umbrella project that's called Cinematic Migrations. And as I was thinking about the project, I was thinking about different kinds of people's works that could possibly fit into the theme, and I thought this makes sense, particularly in terms of thinking about the nomadic, the migratory aspects of the work, the inflatables, very interesting projects that emerged around 1970, and that continued to be iterated in all kinds of ways. And Chip Lord he's a media artist whose work straddles documentary and the experimental genre. He's also a professor emeritus of film and digital media from UC Santa Cruz. And I'm not going to say that much about what he will speak about, because actually I don't really know. But I'm very happy to welcome him here. In recent years, there's been a kind of renewed interest in Ant Farm, the group that he was one of the founding members of. And I remember having a postcard from Ant Farm when I was a student of, I don't know if maybe some of you have this, I don't know if many people had this postcard. It was really popular, of a lot of televisions stacked up in a desert being crashed into. And I don't know why that was so appealing, but it was. And so anyway, Chip's work has also been recently exhibited as part of an exhibition that was at SFMOMA called The Art of Participation, and also in the Cordova Museum nearby. That was last year, in Temporary Structures, Performing Architecture. And without saying any more, I welcome Chip Lord.
Thank you, Renee. It's really an honor to be here because my uncle, Richard C. Lord, was a professor of chemistry here, and he one time brought me to the MIT campus when I think I was 10 years old, and I never expected to be a college professor, but it's a thrill for that reason to be invited to speak here. And I do think this talk will, in some ways, intersect with the idea of cinematic migrations maybe in multiple ways. I'm going to go back, and I'm going to basically present two projects, or two recent projects, but each of them is evolved over multiple years and has a connection to my history as a member of Ant Farm. So I'm going to start with Ant Farm to create some context. And Ant Farm existed officially from 1968 to 1978. And the Ant Farm Media Van version 08 project was from 2008, ongoing, hopefully, to 2030. And I'll talk quite a bit about that project shortly. So Ant Farm was founded by myself and Doug Michaels in 1968 in San Francisco. You know, at that time, there was a sense, I was drawn to San Francisco because of the counterculture. I graduated with a degree in architecture from Tulane University. That year, I went out and I participated in the Halpern workshop in San Francisco. And there was a sense that you had underground radio, underground newspapers, an underground culture was being created. And so we described what we were doing as underground architecture. And a friend said, "Oh, like the ant farm toy I had as a kid." And so instantly, then we had not only a name, but an official color. Ant farms only came in green, the perfect logo, because it was a kind of metaphor. Above ground was the traditional barnyard scene, very traditional architecture. Below ground, the ants made these beautiful biomorphic spaces. And the ants, of course, worked collaboratively. If you know of Ant Farm, you probably, it's maybe through Cadillac Ranch, which was a invited commission from Stanley Marsh, and this is the proposal that was sent to Stanley in late 1973. And I included just because it is a kind of architectural drawing, and it was a standardized drawing sheet, and it included the budget. And then we remade it as an invitation to the 10th anniversary of Cadillac Ranch in 1984. So the Cadillac Ranch was really an example of a collective kind of creative process that we arrived at, translating really a sort of a diagram, actually an advertising diagram that Cadillac put out in the 50s to emphasize the tail fin as a design feature. It was a matter of translating that into 3 dimensions. And this shot is from the opening party, June 21st, 1974. And there was a party also in 1984. It's kind of interesting that it's an unsigned public artwork. It's accessible because you can pull off the Interstate 40 and walk out to it. But it's actually on private land and privately owned. But nevertheless, the public has left their marks on it. But this is 10 years later, and it's still the original paint is visible here. By 2004, that wasn't the case. It's it's quite beat up, but at the same time, it is a certain distance from the highway, and it has a legibility that endures, even from that distance. And so when you get up close to it, it's just kind of a different experience, and it's become an interactive public artwork, I would say, unintentionally. And then Renee mentioned the postcard. This is the postcard image of Meteor Burn. It was done in 1975, and this is kind of the end image, but this was also the beginning. In other words, the idea was to create this specific image of a car crashing through a wall of TV sets. It was conceived in the era of the idea of the spectacle, the public spectacle. But in some ways, it's the Ant Farm project that, for me, represents the larger collaboration, because it had all these different elements that crossed over traditional disciplines, so that the car itself was really a sculptural project that had to be designed and fabricated, and that it took about 9 months to do. And this is an early stage of the creation of the Phantom Dream car, drawing on images that as kids, we shared the love of the dream cars and the auto shows that would introduce the new car models. But the Phantom Dream car, is designed for just this one purpose of crashing through a wall of TV sets. In the course of developing the event and producing it, which took about a year's time, it expanded into all these other areas, into performance, into graphic design, and some of the graphic design is represented here, the logo, of course, that was on the souvenir booklet. and then a different version of the logo on the press release that was sent to all the local TV stations. And then at the very top is a black and white postcard, and that was the invitation sent out to various mailing lists to invite people to the event. So, and then ultimately it was a public performance. It was a form of performance art, you might say. In terms of all the roles that are presented here, this is the souvenir stand, and we also had rent-a-cops. We thought of them as being performance artists too, and at the center were the artist dummies. That name derived from the kind of astronaut or crash dummies, that were put in cars that would be crashed for purposes of studying for public safety. But what you see in this shot is that this is the media area, and you had to have a press pass to get into the media area. And we sent out a press release to all the news organizations, and we sent them press passes, and we said, you'll have to wear the press pass to get into the press area. And sure enough, all 4 local TV stations showed up wearing their press passes. But there was a public too, and the public is behind the barriers on the far right there, and the rent-a-cops are enforcing that aspect.
And so,
this is a
my
clip.
fellow Americans, let me say this finally about media burn. The world may never understand what was done here today, but the image created here shall never be forgotten. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
They won't be given the go-ahead. Please observe the barricades.
Douglas, come on.
Repeat, do not cross over the barricades.
Okay.
Video is working properly.
Now, you want to break that?
No.
Go!
So that's I think a 5-minute excerpt from the media burn tape. And obviously we got that one image. These are multiple shots from that crash. But we started as architects, so I'm going to back up a little bit. Studying architecture in the 1960s, we were, first of all, there was no theory integrated into the architectural curriculum in that. That came later. Brutalism, there was really only one dogma of design, which was modernism. There were some subcategories. I would say brutalism would be one example of that stylistic subdivision of modernism. And as students, suddenly Archigram appeared, and they were a radical group of English architects who published a magazine called Archigram, and it was very kind of utopian in its in visionary, almost science fiction, but within the profession, and that they were, of course, a big influence. And Buckminster Fuller, the Whole Earth Catalog eventually became a kind of post-undergraduate degree for me, I think. And, but also Marshall McLuhan was influential. And finally, the attraction to the counterculture was like the last piece of the puzzle of being transformed from, or explaining maybe why we didn't go into a traditional architectural roles. But we did do several architectural projects within the ant farm practice, including this house designed and built in 1972 and completed in 1973. It's called the House of the Century, named by the client's husband facetiously, and but it was made of ferro cement, and the shell probably will last 100 years. It's not in very good shape at the moment. You know, the fact is, as Ant Farm, we really wanted to be a rock band, and so this is an image that kind of could have been the album cover. So I think I just mentioned that because I think that was, you know, that was another influence from the counterculture and the culture of psychedelic music of the period. And this fine example of brutalism, the Berkeley Art Museum, was in some ways, ironically, the institution that our retrospective exhibition was originated with in 2004. Ironic because the first actual architectural experiments we did were the exact opposite of brutalism. They were symbolically the opposite of brutalism. And they involved using Air Force surplus parachutes as temporary structures on a beach south of Houston on the Gulf of Mexico. And as architecture, they wouldn't really protect you from the elements except the sun. They would protect you from the sun, but they were interactive. And this shot shows Kelly Gloger actually sort of, you know, shaping and controlling the form that this structure would take. And they also had the possibility in a stiff wind of lifting a person off the ground. So, you know, there's a famous quote from the 1968 student movement in Paris, under the paving stones, the beach. Well, we were actually at the beach, you know, in Texas doing these things and these experiments. And it was actually much later that I realized the degree to which they were a symbolic form of architecture posed, you know, precisely against our training as in brutalism. But from the beginning, we were interested in integrating media into the practice as a way of sort of expanding the possibilities. So this is a typical collage. It was made by simply mounting multiple 35 millimeter slides in one frame and projecting them, or projecting them with two projectors or whatever. This project eventually became titled The Electronic Oasis, and this is a representation of it from an exhibition that was at the Columbia Graduate School of Architecture in 2008. But at the center was another idea, which was that in the future we would all have architecture made in computers, you know, and we could be plugged into the computer, and then we could actually be in these fantastical environments. And it was really simply a slideshow. But what was interesting was that you could put any image with next to EnviroMan and EnviroWoman, and it kind of communicated that idea. You know, that's of course well before the Media Lab or virtual reality, and we had no interest in figuring out how the computer was going to make that happen. You know, again, it was the idea that you could put this image out there, and it would be prescient in a way. So we moved from these these parachute-based structures to a slightly more permanent inflatable structures. And this one was also integrated with a theatrical idea. It was Earth Day, the first Earth Day, 1970, at the University of California. And we called it a clean air pod, and we had a portable megaphone, and we were wearing these lab coats, which made us official technicians, and we would announce, there's an air emergency, everybody inside the clean air pod. People would go inside. We didn't have any scrubbing equipment attached to the blowers, but it was a good enough idea to land us on the, I guess, the front page of the Oakland Tribune. And then, we also did other experiments. This is one more level up in permanence using vinyl rather than polyethylene for the inflatable. And all of these, this was about a year's worth of experiments and demonstrations, if you will, throughout California. And it was collected in a publication, the Inflatable Cookbook, that was designed to be a do-it-yourself manual of how to make your own inflatables. So, sort of contingent with that research, if you will, was the Media Van project. And you can see from this photograph, we were hippies. We were definitely hippies, but we embraced technology in a way, and that was sort of counter to the countercultural ethos, if you will. And also, we wanted to design a larger network of another form of, let's say, fragmentary urbanism for a community of new nomads who would wander California or the US. And the project was called the Truck Stop Network, and it never got beyond, at this stage, off the drawing board. But we did go out and kind of then prototype the idea by creating a tour across the US in 1971, the Truck Stop Tour in the Media Van. And the interior of it's a Media Van by virtue of having one Sony Portapack that could be powered by a converter that would convert the 12 volt to charge and run monitors in the van. But Felicity Scott has written about this project, and she describes the Media Van as a total surveillance tool. And that was the kind of the dream, that we would be out on the road, engaged in total surveillance all the time. Curtis Schreier created this placemat. It was something we would give people along the way to explain what we were doing. And believe me, there were lots of people who wanted to know what we were doing, because every time we stopped in the Media Van, people came up and asked, what is this? Today, how many of you have seen the Google van out there mapping? And I know the mapping started right here with the Aspen project, 25 or 30 years ago. But has anybody ever actually encountered the vehicle that does that? Yeah. Anyway, one of the things we were doing also was a form of networking with people that we had either met through a network of mail artists, MAIL artists, or the so-called video underground, the radical software movement. There was a publication called Radical Software. And so this map contains those contacts as meeting points. So we were shooting video on the road, also shooting photographic slides as a kind of roadside documentation. And this is a series of slides that were made into a sort of a product by a company called Environmental Communications. in 1973 and 74. These are just a few examples of things that were shot on the road, on the truck stop tour, which had maybe even a historical element to them when the photos were made, and now they're even slightly more distant history, let's say. And in 2008, then I had these slides digitized and made into a digital slideshow. So this is a piece that visits both that history and then presents it as, in a modernized form, technologically, let's say. But mainly what we were doing when we were out on this tour was visiting college campuses. Sometimes we would, so we would do a video screening of things we had shot along the way. We actually didn't have any editing equipment at that time, so we would edit in the camera, we would edit by changing tapes, but there was a certain excitement, because video at that point was a new technology that wasn't that common, and it was exciting also to just put people in front of the camera and let them see that you could play it back right away, or that you could see a live image, and it's different from a mirror because you're seeing it reversed as other people see you, and so the media van then became the logo in its third version, remodeling or customizing for a project called Top Value Television, which was alternative coverage of the 1972 political conventions. And eventually, the media van, the last stop on the truck stop tour, if you will, was an exhibition at the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston in December 1973. It's a larger show by Ant Farm about the future, or the future as it existed in the past and was being projected into the year 2020, if you will. So this is all, in a sense, the historical context for a project that we did that began in 2007. And the question here is how would you make a version of the media van in 2007 that would be somehow true to that original spirit? It would have to be a reinvention, not just a recreation of a historical object. And since the original media van was, as I've shown, a video viewing platform, as well as a production studio, and it was in some ways a social networking tool. So we took those three programmatic ideas and began designing what it might mean to revisit this project in 2007, 2008. The we I'm referring to here is a three-person team that includes Curtis Schreier, who's an original Ant Farm partner, and Bruce Tom, who's not involved in Ant Farm, but was sort of like the perfect collaborator, trained as both an architect, works as an architect, but also as an artist. And this is one of his sketches. And so we also followed some of the methodology of Ant Farm. So we thought we have to come up with a signature image to represent this idea before we had actually built it. And this is the image. It's actually inspired by a General Motors Fisher Body series of ads that they did in the late 50s, showing the various GM cars shot into outer space in a way. And now this is a short video, which is a fictional version of the rediscovery of the media van.
All set. Rogers, action.
Okay, supposed to hit that. All right, here we are. This is it.
Okay, everybody.
All right. Let's
Pick
ride it
right
up.
This is the one.
Okay.
Anything there?
I don't.
Now we're downhill.
You know what? We're gonna have trouble with that gulp on the way.
We'll be all right.
You think so?
In this car?
Yeah.
So there are a number of key points to be made about how this project was conceived, and one of them is that at the center of the van, it would recapture the feeling of sitting around a hookah and you know, sharing, you know, in this case, sharing media. It would be the idea, and the second key point is that, you know, it should probably be a project that is a post-internal combustion van. It's not any kind of traveling that's going to be done in this media van is going to be done over the internet and not as a physical experience. So the actual van itself has been has had all of the remnants of the oil economy removed, the engine, the wheels, the drivetrain, and so forth. And in the center of the van is the media hookah, a unique designed object, computer-based interactive device that people sit around and, you know, what everybody does now is you know, take out their handheld device and you can plug it in here, and then the media hookah will randomly grab a file from your iPhone or other device. And in that process, it is assembling those files into a digital time capsule. It's one of the interesting aspects to me is the fact that we now live in a world where so many people have cameras in their pockets that the creation of photographs has just, you know, exponentially grown, and yet who's paying attention to that or sampling that, you know? So this was a very meager attempt to try and sample some of those images. The commission was from Rudolph Freiling, the curator, media curator at San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, and it was for a show called The Art of Participation, 1950 to now, that ran in late 2008. And so the interior of the van has been repurposed, so it's really a gathering space. It has actually two functions. It has the function of sitting around the media hookah, but it also has functions as a small video theater, and what you can watch is actual historic video from the original 1970 tour. This is the DVD menu, and so there are 7 titles, edited titles from that original truck stop tour. And in addition to the 7 titles, you can see at the bottom it says archival video. You can also access, I think, 2 or 3 unedited tapes from that period that have been digitized. And so the Media Van, in that sense, contains its own archives, its own history as part of the project and part of the experience. And this is an example of one of the films made in 1970.
Here we are at Tulane University.
Get a stereo pod in here, double vision. She does.
Really, the thing about it that pisses me off is that the only way instead of being a little laid back trip between here and the place.
So you kind of get the idea, as I mentioned earlier, the appearance at each campus was just a demonstration. It was just kind of hanging out. People would come and look at the van, the inflatable Ice 9, and contemplate how they might become nomadic themselves, let's say. So I think it's useful here to look at a brief history of ant farm time capsules, because there were 3 previous time capsules done during the ant farm practice. The first one in 1969 was an invitation to send work to the Paris Biennale, and we mounted this cardboard box on a plywood platform, and we filled it with souvenirs. To be in Houston in the summer of 1969 meant that you were confronting all these images of the Apollo moon landing, because that was the year that Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon's surface. But if you were in Houston, where Mission Control was, it was also all this kind of cowboy country and western imagery. And so this was a combination of objects and souvenirs. And what happened was, when it got to Paris, they put it on a podium and they opened the box, and we hadn't sent any instructions, and so the box remained open, well, only for a couple of days, because people took things, and it was mostly, after 2 or 3 days, an empty box, which it remained for the rest of the exhibition. The second ant farm time capsule, 1972, was designated, this one's going to be a 12-year time capsule. And it was on the occasion of the opening of a new building for the Contemporary Arts Museum in Houston. And it seemed, time capsules often accompany a building project. It turns out, in doing some research, that the majority of time capsules are never found again. I didn't know that, but it kind of makes sense. In this case, we thought, if it's only 12 years, we can come back and be there when it's opened, and that'll be fun. And it was a similar kind of collecting of all the news of the day, other things. Things were donated by some of the curators and other employees of the Contemporary Arts Museum. And but however, we didn't, in this case, designate where the time capsule should be stored in the museum. They put it in the storage room, which happened to be half a flight down. And in 1979 or 1980, halfway through, more or less through the 12-year duration, there was a flash flood in Houston, and water came pouring down into that storage room, and the time capsule floated around. And the museum had better, much more important art to deal with after that flooding. So the time capsule was taken out to Marilyn Oshman's house. She was our friend and was on the board of the museum, and it sat there next to her pool for a few years until 2000.
And ladies and gentlemen, this is not art. This is not art. And thank you very much. And
the occasion, a group known as the Ant Farm has put together a time capsule that will be sealed this evening. Newswatch 11's Bruce Halford has a review of some of the items to be included.
I think it's terribly exciting.
The official repository of the Ant Farm's collection will be a late model refrigerator, selected, we are told, because it is the open door to the American dream. For the next 12 years, if all goes according to plan, these items will rest comfortably if somewhat crowded, simply waiting for time to change us on the outside. Then sometime in 1984, the refrigerator will be reopened, and lots of thoughtful persons will stand around and try to give some meaning to it all.
I can't even see it because I have to go home and prepare for the dinner.
Official endorsement is provided by Contemporary Arts Museum personnel, one of whom is Marilyn Lubetkin, who told us about analyzed rainwater that will be put in the time capsule. Then when you open this, hopefully in 1984, what do you expect it to prove? What significance will it have?
Well, there's really no way of knowing. The rainwater in Houston, we discovered, is very, very clean. It's much cleaner than the doctors at Baylor had expected it to be. There's a distinct possibility that over the next 12 years that the quality of the water will change.
From video.
do you have another press release?
Very,
Be careful what you say.
It's not bait, but I think it's terribly exciting.
Okay, thank you.
Introduce us.
Oh, can anyone understand me now? 2,500 years ago. You know that. You know that.
Demonstrating.
Performance by Curtis Schreier at the opening in 2000. And I neglected to mention that when 1984 rolled around, the curatorial staff of the museum had completely changed, and there was no interest whatsoever in opening the time capsule. So it wasn't until the year 2000 that it was opened, and everything had turned to dust in the time capsule. The third Ant Farm time capsule 1975 at Art Park in upstate New York in Lewiston was a little bit more carefully thought through. It was a station wagon. It was advertisements that invited citizens of the area to make donations, and they could come out for a 2-week period, and the station wagon was on display in the suitcases, and eventually the suitcases were closed and packed into the Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, and it was buried in a convenient hill. And now, Art Park at that time had a very innovative artist residency program. They invited artists to come and do summer residencies there, but not to make any permanent works. So everything had to be removed at the end of the summer. The Citizens Time Capsule was an exception because it was going to be buried and wouldn't be visible. It would not disturb the terrain. That program only lasted, I think, 3 or 4 years, and eventually the administration of Art Park also changed, and it became more of a performing arts facility. And surprisingly, they had no interest in the year 2000 of digging up the time capsule. So that time capsule still remains buried in Lewiston. So it's not such a great history. We thought, now this time, if we're going to make a time capsule, we better really think about how you might control, the eventual opening. Maybe it's better probably not to bury it, in fact. And most experts will tell you that the best way to preserve digital information actually is to copy it and pass it around. But first, let me explain how the media hookah works. We didn't want any signage there, so there's an interface, and you can see on the screen there's an animation inviting you to plug in your phone, and then what happens is there's a puff of smoke appears, and then your image that has just been grabbed from your device is displayed, and it then I think it zooms down into a kind of slideshow that's moving past. There's actually, the background is sort of a road, a black road with white, a white line in the middle. You can get a sense of that here. And so you get to see your file entering into the flow of images, which is the digital time capsule. Also, the media hookah spits out a receipt, and Warren Sack here, my colleague at Santa Cruz, graduate of the Media Lab, is holding his receipt. And the receipt has a thumbnail image, a file name, the date, etc. And in this case, it also invites you to take the receipt to the store, where you'll get a 10% discount. So at San Francisco, then we near the end of the exhibition, we scheduled a closing event, because this is another time capsule tradition that is often, putting it in the ground is often a public ceremony. And so we had the last donation, the 3 artists, and our computer consultant on the left, Paul Raxelbaum. And then the van was closed, and it was put into playback mode. So it then was playing a slideshow continuously. At this time, the media hookah was capable of collecting pictures and also music files. So the slideshow had a music track, and they were actually different durations, so it never would repeat. We scraped the preservative off the windshield, and you could view then the slideshow through the windshield or through the back windows of the van. And it remained that way until the exhibition came down. Now, we thought the museum has commissioned this work. Maybe they would like to acquire it for their collection. But unfortunately, they did not. And okay, one more thing about the closing event. This was what we did is we printed out the existing time capsule. It was something like 40 pages, and each one we signed, and then we just handed them out to people who came to the closing event as a record. So since we were at that point not able to place the time capsule and the media van in the collection, which would have implied an institutional guarantee to the year 2030 that it would then be re-exhibited, we thought, well, do we have is there any ethical reason why we can't actually then show it? And that's what we did. This is a different exhibition a year later, also in San Francisco, at Southern Exposure Gallery, of what we call the SFMOMA Time Capsule Triptyque. It has 2 channels of video. The first one on the left you've seen, the Discovery. The video on the right is called Co-Location Dream. It's an idealized image of where the media van should be placed. Rather than being buried, it seems like it should be in a co-location facility, which would be, of course, air-conditioned and high security. And then all of the images, all of the files are displayed on this light box. And so conceivably, somebody who had made a donation a year earlier, if they came to this exhibition, they could find their donation. Not a very good shot, but these are thumbnails of the images and the music files. Since then, again, we would love for the media van to go to every continent and make a new time capsule. We were successful in getting it to France in 2009, and then it came back. It was in the Estuary Biennale there. It came back to the De Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum here. That was a year ago. And in each location, it has made a time capsule. And of course, the digital archives gets smaller. Now it fits onto a thumb drive, as pictured there. And it's currently at the Arizona State University Museum in Tempe, where it's also being exhibited with the SFMOMA Time Capsule Triptyque. And they're making a new time capsule there. And they have committed to not purchasing the van, but purchasing the time capsule that's made in Arizona, and so they'll get a similar kind of presentation of the 2 channels of video and all the images for the collection there. And there are some other possibilities, and we don't have a permanent resting place, which is always, I think, the difficulty of the time capsule artist, if you will. Okay, I'm gonna leave Ant Farm and for the moment, and you can follow Ant Farm on Facebook. Ant Farm 1968-1978 is the page. So. This is my own work, and this is a project that's been ongoing since roughly 2006. Actually, it does have a historical component as well. It's grouped under the title Air Spaces, and but it does go back to the period, for me, just after the end of the Ant Farm collaboration. And I think because I was struggling with my own identity of what, am I an artist? Am I an architect? Could I be a photographer? I was trying all these different things, but I did this project, which was a series of self-portraits taken in airports, and titled The Executive Air Traveler, which was a United Airlines promotion that preceded the whole mileage thing had not started to happen yet. So I would, I bought a suit, and then I would travel in the suit and photograph myself. This is at O'Hare, and this is at San Francisco and Vancouver. Only one suit, you see, unfortunately. Oh no, then I added a second suit here and a second performance artist, businessman. And at the same time, I started photographing the spaces of airport spaces And it's this great series by Gary Winogrand, the photographer, that he shot about the same time, black and white photographs in airports. But I think because the airport is as an architectural type, or as a building type, it's almost continually in transformation, and so it's actually a pretty interesting documentary subject, because you might find yourself going back to an airport you photographed a few years ago and discover that it has a completely new terminal. But these are all from the early 1980s. And I never kind of did anything with this project. I had a particular interest in LAX at that time because it was, I think, close to San Francisco where I was living. It was accessible. And of course, it had the theme building, which was an iconic structure. And it only cost $38 to go there. And you could fly down and take photographs. So then naturally, when I picked this project up again and began photographing airports again, LAX was one of the places I started shooting. But coincidentally, I was invited then to apply for a video public art project at the LAX airport. And eventually, they commissioned 17 artists to produce works for 2 display systems in the international terminal. And my project is an attempt to create a multifaceted portrait of simultaneity, of all these different destinations that you can fly to and from LAX. And to, in a sense, reflect those travel patterns and to represent the destinations. But of course, I'm representing just the airport destination. They're roughly arranged north, south, east, west, with LA at the center. And it would be wonderful to do this project as live connections, but there wasn't that kind of budget available here. So they become representations of these destinations, either using still photographs or video where available. And it's a 6-minute piece, so I'm going to show the documentation video here. And it's actually, all of these works, they play in rotation, and they're all silent works. But in this particular case, the sound of the terminal is actually a perfect soundtrack. I'm going to turn it down a little bit so I can talk about this piece as it shows. It has actually a kind of a 3-act structure. It has this introductory sequence that was made by pixelating a series of still images shot from the old control tower. And I was fortunate in that I was the only artist who was dealing with the airport as a space in and of itself and other destinations. So they were very cooperative in assisting me and enabling me to shoot on the airport. And for some reason that, let's see, it seemed to freeze there. Okay. There we go. So it has this introductory section that's an overview of the airport, and then it goes into a 9-screen featured movie, if you will, but all the destinations represented on the outside ring of the piece, and they're identified by their 3-letter airport code. And at any given moment, what you're seeing in the center 9 screens is synchronous with one of the other channels, and that's how you can identify. So that's CDG up at the top, Paris Charles de Gaulle. It's what's playing on the larger screen. And there is the possibility of a kind of interactivity here in the sense that passengers arriving in the international terminal, when they come through customs and they walk out and they arrive in the space of arrivals, there's a good chance they can find the place they just came from, right? If they care to study this work. And actually that happens in this documentation video. There's a moment coming up where you'll see an arriving family coming from Mexico, and they're pointing to the specific, their embarkation city. So I was able to draw on an archive of images that I had already started with the larger project. I didn't have a budget to take a trip around the world. I tried to combine traveling for other purposes over a course of several years, and actually this project took several years to reach completion. And in some cases, my research assistant is here, Matt Waxman. He was an undergraduate at that time at UC Santa Cruz. He's since completed architecture degree at Harvard GSD. But he did all the online work, finding photographs on Flickr that were published under a Creative Commons license, and so in some cases we built slideshows that would represent a destination that I couldn't afford to fly to. And in other cases, I had friends traveling, and I would give them an assignment to shoot at the airport when they were in Singapore or Sydney or Taipei. This is a family from arriving from Mexico and interacting with the piece. And this is the only sound I wanted to add to the piece. And then it ends with again, the overview, an attempt to show the whole of the LAX airport. Of course, any airport is impossible to capture in one shot. They're all just too large to do that. So this project is a permanent installation if they can keep it running. And like I say, there were 17 artists commissioned to do works on 2 different display systems, one on either side of the place where arriving passengers come out. So if you go through LAX and you have the time, time to kill, let's say, between planes, it's it will be there. So in that sense, it's for me, it's a great project because it has that sense of permanence. And so I'm going to only show one final thing here. We have to do a transfer over to the Blu-ray.
How much did they pay you to do that?
Sorry?
How much did they pay you?
Okay. This is kind of interesting. I think they spent about $1 million installing all of the hardware. It included a control room and the remodeling of the terminal, the 25 screens on a grid, and then the other display is 29 screens. Actually, no, doubled 56 or screens back to back. But the artist budgets were around $15,000 each for the content. So, I don't know. Okay, so this is another rendering of the same idea, but as a single channel video work. And this is 20 minutes. You can watch this and then we'll have questions.
Please make sure you have all your personal belongings and watch your step as you exit. Garage G and BART station.
gate 97 on the left door. Seating area 1.
Service with beverages followed by another service. Service here snacks, notes, all beverages and a non-payment option. In United Economy, alcoholic beverages are available for $6 US. We proudly accept Visa cards in addition to MasterCard, American Express, Diners Club, and Discover, as well as other major credit and debit cards for purchases. Also, approximately 1.5 hours prior to duty, we will offer another snack service. In the seat pocket front, there is a preview guide that lists all audio and video selections, and the programming will begin in approximately 10 minutes.
overhead locker under the seats in front of you. Please ensure your seatbelt is fastened, your table is folded away, and your seatbelt is on.
How's the time? Well, not a bit of variety. Let's see. 8:70. Don't have a price now. Straight down. Quarter of an hour. Sometimes it bites up a bit. But we did it. Right.
Mexico City. Please ensure your carry-on items and tray table are stowed, your seat back is in the full upright position, and your seatbelt is securely fastened. Also at this time, all portable electronic devices must be turned off until the aircraft is parked at the gate. We'll be on the ground shortly.
Estas tres son las maletas. Esta también. ¿Qué es? ¿Cómo te fue? ¿A poco me extrañaste? Claro que sí, ¿verdad? Venga para acá.
Okay, so we have some time for questions. If there are any.
Thank you very much. When you were talking about Cadillac Ranch, you pointed out how there's a distance between the road and the Cadillacs, and that distance allowed illegibility of Cadillac Ranch. And I saw that happen again with the time capsules, where there was a temporal distance that allowed for illegibility. And then also with to and from LAX, it seemed that in order to know the international airport network as a city, you had to have a type of distance from it that the video collage provided. And so I was wondering what you think about a connection between the distance that media can and may create and an idea of how we know reality.
Yeah, it's a great question. And something I never thought about that, translation from physical distance to temporal distance. And I guess I would say that, we have so many opportunities to, let's say, participate at a distance now that, that perhaps there's a sort of mutation towards, not towards the virtual, but actually, being able to participate from distances across time as well as space. Just the way, as an example, the way the picture phone is a reality now, right? That it, and it's very different to have a Skype, have a conversation with somebody where you're connected to them and through that image, I think. But that's just an interesting observation. I don't know that I can elaborate on it much more than that.
To elaborate, I think, the idea of the representation of reality as something that is affected by media itself, by narrative form, by the structure of that narrative form. And I guess when I think about the physical distance as well as the temporal distance, both those could be imagined as constructing a type of media wherein physical environment is a type of media itself just as much as video is in a similar parallel way. And I want to think about the work that you've done in that sense, maybe where in order to gain a comprehension of the world in which we're immersed within, we might have to step away from it to better immerse ourselves inside it. I feel like I'm seeing that maybe happen at multiple points in the work that you presented.
Mm-hmm. The lesson of the early time capsules was that it's so difficult to, as an artist, to control your work across time. And even in more traditional media, that's true. Once a work is sold, if somebody, now there are protections against them, against the owner modifying the work. And, which makes me think of the fact that the owner of Cadillac Ranch actually moved it one time to a new location. He was careful to reinstall it the same distance from the freeway that it was, but it was on a very similar piece of property. But it's that dimension of time is very elusive and very, very difficult. And I'd like to think that in the Mediavan version 8 time capsule that we've been more successful, but I'm not sure if we have really, in capturing because we can't. There's no way you can capture how those time capsules will be viewed in a future time. even though that's what a time capsule attempts to do, in a way. And there's a place in Atlanta where they keep, if you make a time capsule, you can register your time capsule with, I forget the name of it right now. It's at a university in Atlanta. And, that's where the fact came, the statistic that most time capsules, I think it's like 40% of all time capsules are never found again. But there's an example of an attempt to track them and try to make them accessible into a future time period. What do we coat it with? Roofing tar that you patch a roof with. It's
what kind of station wagon was it?
Oh, it's a very, very careful choice of a Oldsmobile Vista Cruiser, because it had a unique feature. It had the like the Greyhound bus that was designed, I think, by Dreyfus. The seats in the back went up, and there's a second windshield, and so the Vista Cruiser kind of simulated that idea. But at the time, the station wagon also is such a symbol of suburbia and Americana, the fake wood and everything. All of that seemed totally appropriate to housing a time capsule, because it's a sort of time capsule in and of itself.
Is it a 1975?
I think it's a 76. No. Excuse me. I think it's a 67 Oldsmobile. Yeah.
What initially sparked this curiosity in time capsules? It's really interesting that you went and you started with a very standard time capsule concept in a building, and then you kind of expanded on that and explored different ways of doing that. So what exactly about time capsules are you so curious about?
I'm not sure. I couldn't hear that totally.
I noticed that you started the time capsule concept through just whenever you build a building, you start with a time capsule. But everything that you did, all your other projects, are expansions of the concept of a time capsule. I was wondering, what about a time capsule are you so curious about that you keep on doing these exercises in them? Or you keep on doing these exercises in relation to time capsules?
Do you mean what is it about that is attractive about the time capsule itself?
Yes,
Yeah.
and the concept of a time capsule.
Well, it's it's its own archetypical form, and it has this whole history, and so I think it's a way of connecting to that, but then trying to redesign it in a very specific way to make it more of an artwork, let's say, either by shortening the time, because most time capsules are so, ridiculously projected over a long period of time. And with the ant farm, with the second and third ant farm time capsules, the idea that we might actually go and open them was a big part of the project. It was a big, because that was kind of exciting, I think. And then to have some element of built-in randomness or unknown in terms of other people making the donations, I think is interesting. But with the Media Van time capsule, the digital time capsule, I think it's, this idea of selecting from a huge contemporary archives of what people have in their pockets is, that's really interesting to me. And of course, what we got was, you'd see all of the typical genres of amateur photography, boyfriends, girlfriends, family, baby, pets, all these kind of categories of arrangement were showing up. So there weren't necessarily that many surprises, but one thing that was interesting about that project is that there was a kind of generational divide. So people under 30 would just absolutely just sit down and plug in and not even think about it. They knew that's what, just see that cable, that's what you should do. And older people had to think about, try to figure out what's going on here. How do I? But it's random, so you don't get to choose what is going into the time capsule. And to me, that makes it a more interesting sample as a kind of sampling process. I don't know if I answered your question, but those are some additional thoughts. Mike.
Well, in a sense, it's sort of, to me anyway, it's sort of, there's an opposition or a dichotomy in your work that the time capsules are kind of a complete circle of concept. It's like you said, when you opened up the time capsule, one of the time capsules, it all turned to dust. It didn't really matter what was really in there. It was really the idea of doing it and the idea of undoing it. It was all there. It was a complete idea. And in this work, the last work, it's really completely the opposite, where time is really about your personal experience as a video maker and putting a much more sense of having the audience participate in your experience of time in a much more cinematic way. And that it seems like I think it's really beautiful, and it's really it's really cinematic, and it has a lot of drama to it, but it's the opposite of what you were doing before with time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's right. And but this project, this last piece, In Transit, I love the observational form of shooting, and it's something that when we travel, we always are sort of engaging in people watching. It's like you go through that process. As soon as you have the camera, though, it's so much more difficult to try and recreate that experience. Because the camera, it becomes, intercedes in that equation with the subject. Yeah, what else can I say about that? It's highly aestheticized, as you know, and it's highly constructed, and it's not. It wasn't made on one trip around the world. It was made on all these different trips, and then every landing was at LAX. So I had to try and make them appear to fit with the location, like the plane landing in Mexico City is different. Try to match the plane with the sort of the experience that's created, on that leg of the journey. And so it's, it's not in any way like actual travel, right? I mean, that's something else. It is a cinematic migration, or at least it's cinematic, totally cinematic in the experience of it, which is what I think you just pointed out. And the other thing is that it's shot with a Canon Vixia. It's a consumer, high-end consumer camera, HD camera. But, I think it has to be the highest quality image. It's like the older generation of standard definition wouldn't quite work for that piece, because it's about, sort of trying to have the best technology to capture some of those images out the window in particular. It's not all shot with HD, but most of it was. But the point there is that the arrival of, like when I started with video, the television engineers would say, you can't even broadcast that. The quality is so bad, we could never put it on the air. And now, and filmmakers in the 70s were saying, why are you working with that ugly medium of video? You know, when you can get, with 16 millimeter, you can get a pretty good quality image. So now that the difference, that whole gap, technological gap, is completely disappeared in, you know, sort of my working lifetime. And that's fascinating that you can, because I've seen this, this piece on in a commercial theater on a huge screen, and it looked fantastic. You know, it looked, to me, it looked better than it did tonight there, but, you know, almost as good as 35 millimeters. So that, in a way, it's about that too, about the kind of arrival of, you know, the quality of tools has improved to the degree that there isn't that barrier, that inherent barrier technologically anymore.
No, is this on? I just wanted to, that was something that I was interested in, that we've been talking about in the cinematic migration seminar also, just in terms of the different kinds of ways the media has changed, or the different formats and ways in which it's possible to think about them now. And I mean, it's an ongoing discussion, particularly in terms of thinking about moving from analog to digital. I thought it was really interesting to see the combination of the kind of translation into the present and into later times of the earlier material that was used, and with Ant Farm, black and white video footage mixed with other digital kinds of footage, and crossing back and forth. And this was interesting, I mean, because one of the things that does come up is, I mean, it has to do with, like, well, last week we had a couple of guests who, John Comfra and Lena Gopal. They've been working very much in 16 millimeter, and that's what we were looking at, and also their digital material too. But it's a kind of ongoing conversation, and I mean, in terms of transfer and how do things continue, and so there's almost a literalization in terms of, like, the time travel, the time capsule, how it's contained within the medium itself, how the medium itself isn't contained even to any one sort of form. And that was part of my interest in looking at all of this. So yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, you know, it is kind of fascinating that working with a project that was done so long ago, and figuring out what's, you know, either like with the media van, trying to figure out what were the key elements there to bring forward, and how should they be orchestrated in the present. But additionally, yeah, I think, you know, of course, we see those works differently now too than the way they might have been seen then. And it's not, you know, I'm not that interested in just doing only that, right? But it is interesting to go back and revisit that work, in a sense, and see what can be, you know, taken from it and repurposed and represented, and whether it's, you know, it's going to be interesting to an audience today, let's say. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you very much. It was a very interesting presentation, and I'd like to just end for the evening. I'd also like to invite everyone to come to the next two presentations for cinematic migrations. The next one will be Ross Gray, and then the one following that will be Crystal Lines. and you can check online for updates. But thank you very much, Chip,
Thank you.
Lord.
Thank you, Renee.